The Georgia heat didn't just press down, it coiled around you, thick and suffocating, clinging to your skin like a second layer. It was the kind of heat that made secrets fester. On the banks of the Ocmulgee River, where the cypress trees dripped Spanish moss like ancient gray beards, Jamal Washington felt that heat mixed with the electric thrill of a teenage dare. He and his best friend, Kevin, had borrowed Kevin's dad's rusted Ford F-150, the tires crunching softly on the dirt path that was more of a suggestion than a road. Their mission? Illegally snagging a few catfish under the cloak of a moonless night? A minor act of rebellion in the sleepy, suffocating town of Serenity Creek. "You sure about this, man?" Kevin whispered, his voice a nervous tremor in the symphony of cicadas. He fumbled with a cheap headlamp, its beam dancing nervously across the murky water. "Relax," Jamal breathed, grabbing a fishing pole from the truck bed. "Old man Hemlock is watching TV, not the river. We grab a few, we're gone. Bragging rights for a month." The air was still, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, the natural perfume of the riverbank. It was a place of stark contrasts, the peaceful lapping water against the shore and the unnerving, profound darkness of the woods behind them. One felt like life, the other, a place where things went to die. They crept toward their usual spot, a small clearing shielded by a thicket of saw palmetto. As Kevin baited a hook, Jamal took a step further, his worn-out sneakers sinking into the soft, muddy ground near the water's edge. That's when he heard it. Not a squirrel, not a raccoon. It was a sharp, definitive snap, the sound of a heavy foot on a dry twig, somewhere in the dense darkness just beyond the clearing. "Kev!" Jamal hissed, freezing mid-step. "Did you hear that?" Kevin's headlamp beam shot into the trees, illuminating nothing but a wall of impenetrable green and black. Probably just a deer. But it didn't feel like a deer. The silence that followed was different. It was a heavy, listening silence, the kind that comes after a predator has been spotted. All thoughts of catfish and bragging rights evaporated, replaced by a primal, cold dread. "Game warden," Kevin mouthed, his eyes wide with panic. They didn't wait for a second sound. They dropped their gear and scrambled back toward the truck, their hearts hammering against their ribs. In his haste, Jamal's foot caught on something half buried in the mud. It wasn't a root. It was soft, yet firm, and unnaturally cold. He tumbled forward, landing hard on his hands and knees. "Ow, damn it!" he cursed, turning to see what he'd tripped over. Kevin, already near the truck, swung his headlamp back. The beam sliced through the darkness, and for a heart-stopping second, the world froze. It wasn't a log. It wasn't a discarded piece of trash. Protruding from the dark, wet earth was a human hand. Pale, slender fingers, nails painted a chipped, pearlescent pink, were curled slightly as if reaching for something that wasn't there. A strangled gasp escaped Jamal's throat. Time seemed to warp, stretching the moment into an eternity. The image was surreal, a nightmare fragment dropped into reality. The hand, the mud, the oppressive silence, and then another sound, closer this time, a rustle in the bushes to their right. It wasn't an animal, it was a deliberate shuffling sound, the sound of someone trying to move without being heard. The unspoken terror was blinding. They weren't alone. The person who had put that hand in the ground might still be here, watching them. Kevin didn't scream. He let out a choked guttural sound and yanked open the driver's side door. "Jamal, go!" Jamal scrambled to his feet, mud sucking at his sneakers, his mind a white-hot blank of panic. He didn't look back. He sprinted, fueled by pure adrenaline, and dove into the passenger seat as Kevin slammed the truck into gear. The tires spun, spitting mud and gravel before catching hold. The old Ford fishtailed wildly on the dirt track before lurching onto the paved road, its engine screaming in protest as they fled into the relative safety of the town's streetlights, leaving the darkness, the hand, and the unseen watcher behind. 20 minutes later, the blue and red lights of the Serenity Creek Police Department strobed across the same patch of riverbank, painting the cypress trees in frantic, unnatural colors. Detective Marcus Thorne stepped out of his unmarked sedan, the familiar scent of stale coffee and paperwork clinging to his suit. At 38, Thorne was a veteran, an anomaly in this predominantly white department, a sharp, methodical black detective whose clearance rate was the only thing that kept the town's old guard, like Chief Patterson, from benching him. He pulled on a pair of latex gloves, his eyes already scanning, absorbing. The scene was cordoned off, but it felt wrong. A young, pale-faced deputy was briefing him. "2 kids found it, sir, scared out of their minds. Said they heard someone in the woods with them." Thorne nodded, his gaze fixed on the partially excavated body. A young woman. The ME was already on scene, but Thorne didn't need him to state the obvious. This wasn't a simple dumping. The body was hastily buried, the earth around it disturbed carelessly. Clumps of mud thrown about. Footprints, the kid's sneakers and something else, a larger boot print, were everywhere. It was sloppy, amateurish. It looked less like a calculated disposal and more like a panicked act that had been violently interrupted. He crouched near the victim's hand, the same one that had sent 2 teenagers screaming into the night. It was as if the killer had been in the middle of their grim task when Jamal and Kevin stumbled upon them, forcing them to flee before they could finish the job. The thought sent a chill down his spine, a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. The killer hadn't just been here. They had been here minutes ago, and somewhere out in the oppressive dark Georgia night, they were now on the run, knowing they had left behind a witness. Or what they thought was a witness. Thorne stood up, his gaze sweeping over the chaotic scene. This wasn't just a murder. It was a near miss, a collision of perpetrator and witness in the dark. And it was this collision, this element of pure, panicked chance, that made the case 10 times more volatile. The killer was spooked, unpredictable, and they had no idea who they had almost run into. The Serenity Creek Police Department was a place of jarring contrasts. On the walls hung faded, smiling photos of the annual town picnic, a testament to a manufactured harmony. But the air inside was sterile, thick with the scent of disinfectant and the low hum of institutional bureaucracy. Here, in his small, cluttered office, Detective Thorne stared at the face of the woman from the river. Her driver's license photo showed a vibrant, 24-year-old woman named Nisha Brooks. Her smile was wide and genuine, her eyes full of a light that had been brutally extinguished. The most gut-wrenching detail was on the report next to her photo. Marital status. Married. Date of marriage. 2 months ago. A honeymoon period that had ended in a shallow, muddy grave. The hardest part of the job wasn't the bodies or the blood. It was this. The moment you had to walk up to a front door and shatter someone's world with a few carefully chosen, inadequate words. Nisha and Darius Brooks lived in a small, tidy blue house in a newer subdivision, the kind with perfectly manicured lawns and a sense of quiet, suburban aspiration. It was a picture of domestic bliss, a stark, painful contrast to the grim reality Thorne carried with him. He knocked, the sound echoing unnaturally in the quiet afternoon. The door was opened by a tall, broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s. His hands were thick and calloused, the hands of a mechanic, and his face was etched with exhaustion. This was Darius Brooks. Gray already peppered his short-cropped hair, making him look older than his 44 years. "Mr. Brooks," Thorne began, holding up his badge, "I'm Detective Marcus Thorne, SCPD." A flicker of hope ignited in Darius's tired eyes. "Did you find her? Did you find Nisha?" Thorne took a slow, steadying breath. This was the precipice. "Mr. Brooks, I'm very sorry. We found your wife's body this morning. She was discovered down by the Ocmulgee River." For a moment, Darius just stood there, his face a complete blank, as if the words were in a language he didn't understand. Then, the foundation of his world crumbled. His knees buckled, and he grabbed the doorframe to keep from collapsing. A low, guttural sound of denial escaped his lips. No, you're wrong. Not my Nisha, not her." Thorne moved instinctively, guiding the trembling man to a plush sofa in the living room. Darius sank into it, his large frame convulsing with silent, racking sobs as he buried his face in his hands. The room was filled with photos of them, a wedding picture on the mantelpiece, both of them beaming, a candid shot from a lake trip, Nisha laughing as Darius pretended to push her in. Each photo was a testament to a future that had just been stolen. "I'm sorry," Thorne said again, the words feeling hollow and useless in the face of such raw grief. "We'll need you to come down to make a formal identification, but we can wait until tomorrow." Darius looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and swimming with tears. "How?" How did this happen? Thorne hesitated. He couldn't drop the full weight of the truth on him now, not the part about strangulation, about a struggle. We're still investigating the circumstances, he answered evasively. He needed to be the calm anchor in this storm of grief, but he also needed to be a detective. Mr. Brooks, I know this is an incredibly difficult time, but I have to ask you a few questions. When was the last time you saw your wife? Darius wiped his face with the back of his hand, struggling to compose himself. 3 days ago, in the morning. She said she was going to see her friend, LaShonda, then she was going to stop by my sister's place, Tamika's. His voice broke. She never came home. I called everyone. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I waited a day, thought maybe she just needed space. Then I called you guys. He looked around the room, lost. We were all looking for her. And your sister? Did Nisha make it to her house? No, I called Tamika. She said Nisha was supposed to come over, but she never showed. She was worried sick too. Thorne asked a few more standard questions about Nisha's routines, her job at the local diner, any potential enemies. Darius answered them through his tears, his narrative consistent, his grief seemingly absolute. He painted a picture of a loving husband frantic with worry, a man whose worst fears had just been realized. He appeared to be the very definition of a shattered victim. As Thorne was preparing to leave, having gathered all he could for now, Darius spoke again, his voice raspy. Detective, just one thing. Was it an accident? Did she maybe fall in the river? The question was desperate, a plea for a less monstrous reality. Thorne met his gaze. It was a critical moment. He saw a man drowning in sorrow, and his instinct was to offer some small comfort, but his detective's mind was cataloging, observing. He looked into Darius's tear-filled eyes, searching for something beyond the pain. We're looking at all possibilities, Mr. Brooks. I promise I'll keep you informed. Thorne walked back to his car. The image of the weeping husband seared into his mind. The grief was palpable, the heartbreak undeniable. And yet, as he replayed their conversation, a tiny dissonant detail surfaced. It was almost nothing, a flicker of an eye, a split-second tightening of the jaw. While Darius was sobbing, his body shaking with grief, there had been a fleeting moment just before he asked about it being an accident, where his eyes had cleared. For a single, almost imperceptible beat, the overwhelming sorrow had vanished, replaced by a look of sharp, cold, calculating control. It was as if a mask had slipped for a fraction of a second before being hastily put back in place. It was probably nothing. A man trying to pull himself together in the face of unimaginable trauma. But Thorne had learned long ago that the devil wasn't just in the details. He was in the details that didn't fit. And that momentary flash of ice in the middle of a sea of tears was a detail that refused to fit. The aroma of burnt coffee and stale grease hung heavy in Sally's diner, a place frozen in time with its cracked red vinyl booths and jukebox in the corner. It was here that Nisha Brooks had worked, and it was here that Tim hoped to find a clearer picture of the woman beyond the smiling wedding photos. But his first stop wasn't the diner. It was a small, independent coffee shop on the other side of town, far from the prying eyes and listening ears of Serenity Creek's gossip mill. He was meeting Nisha's best friend, LaShonda. LaShonda was a stark contrast to the town's muted palette. Her hair was a fiery cascade of red braids, and a collection of silver bracelets jangled on her wrist as she nervously stirred a sugar packet into her latte. She was 29, with sharp, intelligent eyes that were currently sizing Thorne up with a heavy dose of suspicion. I don't talk to cops, she said flatly, not making eye contact, especially not around here. The implication was clear. In Serenity Creek, justice often depended on who you were and what you looked like. I'm not here as the cops, Ms. Tatters, Thorne said, his voice low and even. I'm here to find out who did this to your friend. Nisha deserves that. You know she does. His words seemed to land. She looked up, the hard shell of her distrust cracking just enough to show the raw grief underneath. She was a good person, she whispered, her gaze drifting to the window. So full of life. It's not right. Thorne let the silence sit for a moment before pressing gently. Her husband said you were the last person she was supposed to see. Did she meet with you that day? LaShonda nodded, her bracelets clinking softly. Yeah, She came by my apartment. We hung out for a couple of hours. She hesitated, chewing on her lower lip. She was upset. Upset about what? This was the pivot point. LaShonda took a deep breath, a silent debate playing out across her features. Finally, loyalty to her dead friend won out. Look, detective, I don't want to speak ill of the dead or of a grieving husband, but that marriage, it wasn't the fairy tale everyone thought it was. Thorne leaned forward, his senses on high alert. What do you mean? Darius, she said, her voice laced with disdain. He was possessive, not at first, but after the wedding. It was like a switch flipped. He was constantly checking her phone, questioning where she'd been, who she was talking to. He'd time her trips to the grocery store. Nisha said she felt like she was suffocating, like she was living in a cage. The image of the weeping, heartbroken husband began to warp, to twist into something darker. Was he ever violent with her? Not physically, not that she told me, LaShonda admitted. It was all mental, the control, the jealousy. She told me she'd made a mistake. The age gap, their interests, they were worlds apart. He wanted a quiet little wife at home, and Nisha. Nisha wanted to fly. This was a motive, a classic tragic motive. Was she planning on leaving him? LaShonda shrugged. She was thinking about it, but they had only been married 2 months. She felt trapped, guilty. She wanted to try to make it work, but her heart wasn't in it. She paused, then lowered her voice even more. She was unhappy with him, but she wasn't unhappy in her life. Thorne caught the nuance immediately. Was she seeing someone else? LaShonda's eyes darted away, a clear sign of evasion. I can't talk about that. Nisha was my friend. I'm not going to tarnish her memory by spreading gossip. Ms. Tatters, this isn't gossip, Thorne pressed, his tone firm but not unkind. This is a murder investigation. If she was involved with someone, that person could be a suspect, or they could be in danger themselves. I need to know. A single tear traced a path down LaShonda's cheek. She wiped it away angrily. She never told me his name, she finally relented. She was so secretive about it, so scared Darius would find out. All she said was that she had finally met someone who understood her, someone who saw the real Nisha. She called him her true light. She was radiant when she talked about him, in a way I never saw when she was with Darius. A secret lover, the classic third point in a deadly triangle. This phantom true light was now Thorne's primary target. He was the missing piece, the man who could have pushed a jealous husband over the edge. Thank you, LaShonda, Thorne said, closing his notebook. You've been a great help. As he stood to leave, LaShonda grabbed his arm, her eyes pleading. Find him, detective. Find the bastard who did this to her. Thorne walked out of the coffee shop into the glaring Georgia sun, his mind racing. The picture was becoming clearer, but also more dangerous. An unhappy young wife, a controlling older husband, and a secret lover in the shadows. It was a textbook recipe for a crime of passion. He had a strong feeling that Darius Brooks's grief, as convincing as it was, might be nothing more than a performance. But to prove it, he needed to find Nisha's true light. He needed to find the man she was willing to risk everything for. And he had a sinking feeling that finding him would be like trying to catch smoke. The Linwood Community Clinic smelled of rubbing alcohol and quiet desperation. It was a place for the uninsured and the overlooked, a world away from the manicured lawns of the Brooks' neighborhood. It was also where Tamika Brooks, Darius's 32-year-old sister, worked as a nurse. Thorne found her in a small break room, her face pale and drawn, her nurse's scrubs looking 2 sizes too big for her thin frame. When she saw his badge, a fresh wave of grief washed over her. Her composure, the professional calm of a medical worker, crumbled instantly. Detective, she whispered, her voice trembling. Any news? We're making progress, Thorne said gently, taking a seat opposite her. I just need to clarify a few things. Darius mentioned that Nisha was supposed to visit you on the day she disappeared. Tamika nodded, wringing her hands. Yes, she was supposed to come over right after seeing LaShonda. I waited. I kept the door unlocked. I called her phone, texted her. No answer. Her eyes filled with tears, a look of profound guilt on her face. I keep thinking, she choked out, if only she had made it to my house. If she had just come to me, maybe she'd still be alive. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Her grief felt raw, almost overwhelming. It was more than just the sorrow for a sister-in-law. It was a deep, personal anguish. Thorne noted it, but attributed it to the shock and the closeness Darius had described. "You and your brother are close?" "Always," she said, looking up. "Our parents passed when we were young. It's just been the two of us for a long time. We've always had each other's backs." "How did you feel about him marrying Nisha?" The age difference was significant. Tamika managed a weak, watery smile. "I was happy for him. So happy. After his first divorce, Darius was lost, alone. Nisha brought him back to life. She was a breath of fresh air for both of us." Her answers were perfect. She was the devoted sister, the loving sister-in-law, shattered by the tragedy. But as Thorne observed her, a small, discordant note played in his mind. He couldn't put his finger on it, but something about her carefully constructed sorrow felt rehearsed. He shifted gears. "I have to ask, Ms. Brooks, is your brother a jealous man?" Her posture stiffened. "Why would you ask that?" "It's a standard question. We're building a psychological profile of everyone involved." She let out a long, shaky sigh, as if surrendering a painful truth. "Yes, Darius can be possessive. It's his biggest flaw. It's why his first marriage ended. His ex-wife couldn't handle the constant suspicion. He was better with Nisha at first, but lately, he was getting that old look in his eye again. Checking her phone, asking too many questions. This corroborated LaShonda's story. The cage was real. "Were you aware of any specific conflicts between them?" "Nisha never confided in me about problems with Darius," Tamika said, shaking her head. "I think maybe she didn't want to put me in the middle. She was always so considerate." Thorne left the clinic feeling a mix of pity and suspicion. Tamika's grief was undeniable, but her story was almost too neat, too clean. It fit perfectly into the narrative of a tragic accident or a crime committed by a stranger, conveniently steering clear of any real trouble within the family. Later that afternoon, Thorne was in the cold, sterile environment of the county morgue. The air was frigid, a stark contrast to the world outside. Dr. Alistair Finch, the medical examiner, a man who seemed more comfortable with the dead than the living, pulled up the autopsy photos on a large monitor. "Your victim didn't drown," Dr. Finch said, his voice a dry monotone. He pointed to a close-up of Nisha's neck. The bruising was faint, almost hidden by the river silt, but it was there. Ligature marks are absent. The bruising patterns and petechial hemorrhaging in her eyes are classic signs of manual strangulation. He used his bare hands. Thorne stared at the image, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. "A crime of passion," he stated. "Precisely," Finch confirmed. "This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was personal, intimate, in the most violent way. The force required suggests extreme emotional arousal, rage. He was most likely facing her when he did it." He swiped to another image. "We also found skin cells under her fingernails. She fought back, hard." The image of the vibrant young woman in the photos clashed violently with the clinical, brutal reality of her final moments. She had fought for her life against someone she knew, someone who was looking directly into her eyes as they killed her. Thorne thanked the doctor and walked out into the oppressive heat, his mind racing. A crime of passion, a controlling, jealous husband, a secret lover. All the pieces were there, but something still felt off. He pulled out his notebook and reread his notes on Tamika. "I waited all afternoon. She never showed." He remembered something else she'd said during their conversation, a small, offhand comment about being swamped at the clinic. On a hunch, he called the clinic's main desk. "This is Detective Thorne. I just need to verify a small detail for my report. Was Nurse Tamika Brooks on a regular schedule 3 days ago, on Tuesday?" The receptionist, a friendly woman named Brenda, rustled some papers. "Let's see, Tuesday. Oh, that was a crazy day. We had that pile up on the interstate. Tamika was supposed to leave at 3, but she stayed on. Dr. Evans needed her to help with sutures. She didn't clock out until well after 5:30. Thorne felt a jolt, a spark of clarity. Tamika had clocked out at 5:30 p.m., but she had told him, with tears in her eyes, that she had been home all afternoon, waiting for Nisha. It was a small lie, a seemingly insignificant detail in the grand scheme of things. But it was a lie nonetheless. And in a murder investigation, there are no small lies. There are only doors. And Tamika Brooks had just shown him one she desperately wanted to keep closed. The air in Chief Bill Patterson's office was always thick with the scent of cherry pipe tobacco and condescension. Patterson was a relic, a man whose worldview had been forged in a different, simpler time, a time when men like Marcus Thorne knew their place. He leaned back in his oversized leather chair, a portrait of skeptical authority as Thorne laid out his request. "A search warrant for Darius Brooks's house?" Patterson said, taking a slow puff from his pipe. "Marcus, the man just lost his wife. He's a grieving husband, not a suspect." "Chief, his wife was strangled. The ME confirmed it was a crime of passion. The best friend says the marriage was falling apart, and Nisha was seeing someone else. Darius fits the profile of a jealous husband," Thorne argued, keeping his voice steady and professional, betraying none of the frustration simmering beneath the surface. Patterson blew a smoke ring toward the ceiling. "The profile? Son, this is Serenity Creek, not Atlanta. We don't have profiles. We have good people and we have trouble. The Brooks family, they're good people. Darius is a hard-working mechanic. His sister is a nurse. I think you should be focusing your energy on the transients down by the river, the drug addicts. That's where your trouble is." The unspoken message was as clear as the glass paperweight on Patterson's desk. "You're barking up the wrong tree, and you're bothering a white family." It was a familiar dance, one Thorne had perfected over the years. He knew pushing back too hard would get him stonewalled. "With all due respect, Chief, I have to follow the evidence," Thorne said calmly. "LaShonda's testimony gives us probable cause. A judge will sign off on it. I just need your approval to proceed." Patterson sighed, a long, theatrical display of impatience. "Fine, go ahead. But you'd better not be wrong, Thorne. I don't want to be fielding calls from the mayor because my detective is harassing a man in mourning." The warrant felt like a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Thorne assembled a small team, and they descended on the quiet blue house later that afternoon. Darius was there, his eyes hollow, with a mixture of grief and indignation. "You think I did this? You think I hurt my own wife?" he asked, his voice cracking as the uniforms began their methodical search. "It's standard procedure, Mr. Brooks," Thorne replied, his tone neutral. "We have to eliminate all possibilities." The house itself was a shrine to a happy marriage. Wedding photos, vacation snaps, little handwritten notes stuck to the fridge. It was a perfect facade. The search of the main house yielded nothing. No hidden diaries, no suspicious letters, no murder weapon tucked under a mattress. Thorne could feel the clock ticking, could almost hear Patterson's "I told you so." The other officers were starting to look restless, their search becoming less meticulous. It was looking like a bust. Then they moved to the garage. The space was what you'd expect from a mechanic, tidy, organized. Tools hung in neat rows on a pegboard wall. A half-assembled motorcycle stood in the corner, covered by a tarp. At first glance, it was clean. Too clean. One of the forensic techs, a young woman named Chen, sprayed a fine mist of luminol across the concrete floor. They cut the lights. For a moment, nothing. Then, slowly, patches began to glow with an eerie, faint blue light. They were small, scattered, mostly near a floor drain in the center of the garage. It was blood, but it had been meticulously cleaned, scrubbed away. "It's not much," Chen said, shaking her head. "Could be from anything. A cut finger, a bloody nose. Not enough to say it's a crime scene." Thorne's gut screamed otherwise. The placement, the evidence of a thorough cleaning, it was suspicious. But it wasn't proof. He watched as his team photographed the faint stains and bagged a few nearby rags for testing, but he knew it wasn't enough. Patterson would dismiss it. A defense attorney would laugh at it. They were losing momentum. The trail was going cold. The team was packing up their kits, the search effectively over, when Thorne stood motionless in the center of the garage. The smell of gasoline and bleach, faint but discernible, hung in the air. The clean floor, the faint traces of blood, the missing lover. His instincts, honed over hundreds of cases, were firing off like alarm bells. Something was here. Something vital they were all missing. The killer had been smart, cleaning the scene meticulously. But people who clean that thoroughly often do so because there was a lot to clean up. He pulled out his phone, ignoring the questioning look from the other officers. "This is Thorne," he said into the receiver. "I need a K9 unit at my location. Yes, a cadaver dog. Now." The lead uniform gave him a skeptical look. "Detective, we've swept the place. There's no body here." "I know," Thorne said, his eyes scanning every inch of the garage, from the oil stains on the floor to the cobwebs in the rafters. "But a body was here, and I'm willing to bet a part of it, a scent, a trace they couldn't scrub away, is still lingering in this room." He was going against protocol, extending a search that his chief had already deemed a waste of time. It was a gamble, but as he looked at the too-clean floor of Darius Brooks's garage, he knew it was a gamble he had to take. An hour later, the atmosphere in the Brooks's garage had shifted from one of quiet frustration to tense anticipation. Officer Miller arrived with his partner, Shadow, a magnificent German shepherd with intelligent, watchful eyes, and a nose that could detect the chemical compounds of human decomposition from miles away. Shadow was a living, breathing piece of forensic technology, and Thorne had staked his credibility on the dog's ability to find what human eyes and chemical tests had missed. Darius, who had been sitting sullenly on his porch, stood up, a flicker of alarm in his eyes. "What's this? What's the dog for?" "Standard procedure," Thorne repeated, his gaze never leaving the dog. Miller unsnapped Shadow's leash and gave a quiet command. "Seek." The dog entered the garage, its demeanor instantly changing from relaxed to focused. It moved with a quiet, methodical intensity, its nose twitching, sampling the air, ignoring the lingering sense of oil and gasoline. The forensic team watched in silence. This was the moment of truth. Shadow swept the perimeter of the garage, then crisscrossed the center. It paused at the floor drain where the luminol had glowed, sniffed intently, but then moved on. A collective, unspoken sigh of disappointment seemed to fill the room. Thorne felt a knot of dread tighten in his gut. "I was wrong." But then Shadow stopped. He was near the large, heavy workbench against the back wall, a space cluttered with tools and spare parts. The dog became agitated, whining softly, its tail low. It began to sniff frantically at the floor beneath the bench, then started to bark, a sharp, insistent sound that echoed off the concrete walls. Shadow pawed at the ground, scratching at a section of the floor that looked no different from the rest. "Good boy, Shadow," Miller praised, kneeling beside the dog. "Show me." Thorne and the forensic team converged on the spot. It was a section of concrete partially obscured by the workbench's shadow. To the naked eye, it was unremarkable, but Shadow was adamant. A forensics tech brought a crowbar. With a groan of protesting metal and a crack of old concrete, they pried up the section Shadow had indicated. It wasn't just a piece of the floor, it was a poorly fitted wooden plank, disguised to look like concrete. Beneath it was a shallow hidden compartment. The air went still. Everyone leaned in. Inside the dark recess lay a collection of damning secrets. A balled-up bundle of rags, stiff and dark with dried blood. Far more blood than the faint traces they had found on the surface. Tucked beside it was a small glittering object. A single earring, a small silver hoop with a tiny pearl. Thorne recognized it instantly from Nisha's driver's license photo. And lying on top of the rags was the final, crucial piece. A heavy, adjustable crescent wrench. It had been wiped down, but a smear of what looked like blood was still visible in the tool's adjustable gear mechanism. "Bag it all," Thorne commanded, his voice tight with a mixture of vindication and grim satisfaction. "Every last piece." This was the murder scene. This was the weapon. Darius hadn't just cleaned the garage. He'd hidden the evidence of his crime right under his own feet. The rage, the struggle, the cleanup, it had all happened right here. As a tech was carefully lifting the wrench into an evidence bag, her gloved finger brushed against something small and black at the bottom of the compartment. "Hold on, detective. What's this?" She held it up with a pair of tweezers. It was a tiny spy camera, no bigger than a sugar cube, its lens aimed at the world like a malevolent, unblinking eye. Thorne's mind raced. This changed everything. Darius hadn't just suspected his wife. He had been actively spying on her. He had likely captured her affair on camera, the final proof that pushed him over the edge. The recording would be their smoking gun, a direct window into the motive. "The memory card," Thorne said, a sense of urgency in his voice. "Where's the memory card?" The tech carefully turned the tiny device over. She probed the slot with her tweezers. Then she looked up at Thorne, her expression grim. "It's empty, Detective. The slot is empty." A wave of cold washed over Thorne. The relief of finding the hidden compartment was instantly replaced by a new, more chilling realization. The killer had been meticulous. He had hidden the weapon and the blood-soaked rags, but he knew the most damning piece of evidence wasn't the tool he'd used to strike the blow. It was the digital recording of why he'd done it. He had hidden the evidence of the murder, but he had taken the evidence of the motive with him. The killer wasn't just enraged and sloppy. He was also smart, calculating, and one step ahead. And he was holding the one piece of evidence that could explain everything. The discovery in the garage shifted the entire investigation into high gear. For Detective Thorne, the theory was now solidified, etched in his mind like a blueprint. Darius Brooks, consumed by jealousy, plants a spy camera. He captures his wife, Nisha, with her secret lover. In a fit of rage, he confronts her in the garage. The argument explodes into violence, and he kills her with the wrench. Then, in a moment of cold clarity, he hides the physical evidence and, most importantly, destroys the memory card containing the visual proof of her affair. It was a solid theory. The only problem was the ghost at its center. "The lover is the key," Thorne insisted, pacing in front of the evidence board in his office. Nisha's smiling face was pinned at the center, surrounded by a web of connections. Darius saw his face on that camera. That's what set him off. We find the man, we find the final piece of the motive, and the case is closed. Chief Patterson, however, remained unimpressed. He stood in the doorway of Thorne's office, arms crossed, the scent of his pipe tobacco, an unwelcome intrusion. "So, you found some bloody rags and a wrench in the man's garage," he said, his tone dismissive. "He's a mechanic, Thorne. He probably cut himself working on that motorcycle. You're building a mountain out of a molehill because you've got a narrative you like." "Chief, we also found her earring and a spy camera," Thorne retorted, his patience wearing thin. "A kinky couple, maybe. Doesn't make him a killer. Until you can show me who this phantom lover is, all you have is circumstantial evidence that a good lawyer will tear to shreds. Stop chasing ghosts and find some real evidence." Patterson's resistance was a wall, but Thorne ignored it. He and a small, trusted team dove headfirst into Nisha's life, determined to unmask her lover. They meticulously combed through her phone records, but the call logs were clean. Mostly calls to Darius, LaShonda, and the diner. Her social media was a carefully curated gallery of her life as a happy newlywed. They interviewed every male employee at the diner, every acquaintance LaShonda could name. They came up with nothing. No one had ever seen Nisha with another man. It was as if her secret life was completely disconnected from her real one. Days turned into a week. The trail grew colder. The pressure from Patterson and the DA's office mounted. They had Darius Brooks, the jealous husband with a hidden compartment full of bloody evidence in his garage, yet they couldn't build an airtight case. The absence of the lover, the missing piece of the motive, was a gaping hole in their prosecution. Thorne was starting to feel the first tendrils of doubt. Had he been wrong? Was there another explanation for the evidence in the garage? He spent his nights poring over the case files, the victims' photos, the sterile reports. Nisha's smiling face seemed to mock him from the evidence board. "You're missing something," it seemed to say. "Something right in front of you." The breakthrough came from the most unlikely of sources. An elderly woman named Mildred Wilkins, who lived across the street from the Brooks' house, had been one of the first people Thorne had interviewed. At the time, she had been tight-lipped, a firm believer in the mind-your-own-business philosophy of old-school Southern neighborhoods. But something had been eating at her. She showed up at the police station one afternoon, clutching her purse with wrinkled, nervous hands. "Detective Thorne?" she asked the officer at the front desk. "I need to speak with him. I think I remembered something." Thorne met her in a small, quiet interview room. "Mrs. Wilkins, thank you for coming in." "I haven't been able to sleep right," she began, her voice a reedy whisper. "Thinking about that poor girl. When you first asked, I didn't want to be a busybody, but my conscience won't let me rest." She took a shaky breath. "It was the day she disappeared, that Tuesday. I was sitting on my porch, shelling peas. I remember because my stories were on." Thorne leaned forward, listening intently. "I saw Nisha's little red car," Mrs. Wilkins continued. "It wasn't parked at her house. It was parked 2 streets over, down near the corner of Maple and Elm. It sat there for a long time. over an hour at least. I thought it was strange. Her own driveway was empty. Why would she park so far away? Maple and Elm. Thorne's mind instantly pulled up a mental map of the town. He knew that intersection. It was a quiet residential corner, unremarkable in every way except for one. It was 1 block away from Tamika Brooks's house. The detail hit Thorne like a physical blow. Nisha hadn't parked in front of her sister-in-law's house. She had parked down the street, out of sight. Why? People do that for one reason: to hide, to meet someone without being seen. He had been so focused on finding a man, a phantom true light, that he had overlooked the obvious. The secret wasn't about a stranger. It was inside the family. His gaze shot back to the evidence board in his mind, to the web of connections, to Tamika, the grieving sister-in-law who had seemed too distraught, the sister-in-law who had lied about her work schedule. "Mrs. Wilkins," Thorne said, his voice charged with a new energy, "you said you saw her car. Did you happen to see Nisha herself?" The old woman thought for a moment, her brow furrowed. "I believe I did, just a glimpse. I saw her walking from her car, in the direction of Tamika Street. The ghost he had been chasing wasn't a man at all. It was a secret hidden in plain sight, a secret that had been right under his nose the entire time, and he now knew exactly where to look for it." The request for traffic camera footage was met with a groan from the department's overworked IT tech, but Thorne was relentless. The camera he wanted wasn't on a main thoroughfare. It was a small, unassuming dome camera mounted on a utility pole at the intersection of Maple and Oak, 1 street over from Tamika Brooks's house. It was positioned to catch speeders, but its wide-angle lens captured the entire streetscape. It was a long shot. The quality could be grainy, the angle wrong, but it was the only impartial witness he had. Hours later, Thorne was hunched over a monitor in a darkened room, the glow of the screen illuminating the intense focus on his face. He fast-forwarded through hours of mundane footage: a mail truck making its rounds, kids riding bikes, a dog chasing a squirrel. It was the tedious, painstaking work that defined most investigations. Then he paused, rewound, and zoomed in. Timestamp: Tuesday, 4:15 p.m. A small red Toyota Corolla, Nisha's car, pulls up and parks at the far end of the street, just as Mrs. Wilkins had described. A few moments later, Nisha gets out. She looks around, a subtle but unmistakable gesture of caution, before pulling her purse onto her shoulder and walking out of the frame in the direction of Tamika's house. Thorne felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. The first concrete proof of a lie. Tamika had sworn Nisha never showed up. The camera proved she was, at the very least, in the immediate vicinity. He kept watching. The minutes ticked by on the screen. 4:30 p.m., 4:45 p.m., 5 p.m. Nothing. Just the quiet, sleepy rhythm of a suburban afternoon. Thorne was about to fast forward again when a vehicle entered the frame, moving slowly, unnaturally so. It was a dark blue Ford F-150, Darius's truck. It cruised past the intersection, slowed down, and then circled the block. Once, twice. The movements weren't casual. They were predatory. It was the circling of a shark. Thorne's breath caught in his throat. He was watching a man hunting his own wife. At 5:22 p.m., Nisha re-entered the frame, walking back toward her car. Her posture was different now. Her shoulders were slumped, her head down. She looked troubled, defeated. As she reached her car, Darius's truck screeched to a halt beside her, cutting her off. The grainy footage showed Darius getting out of the truck. Even from a distance, the anger in his body language was palpable. His movements were sharp, aggressive. He gestured wildly. Nisha flinched, taking a step back. They were arguing, a heated, intense confrontation on a quiet suburban street. The silent, grainy images screamed with a violence the microphone couldn't capture. After a few agonizingly long moments, Nisha seemed to relent. Her shoulders sagged in defeat. She walked around to the passenger side of Darius's truck and got in. The truck peeled away, leaving her little red car abandoned on the side of the road. Thorne sat back, a cold certainty settling in his stomach. This was the missing 40 minutes of Nisha's life. She had gone to Tamika's, and Darius had known it. He hadn't just stumbled upon her. He had been actively stalking her. He had followed her there, waited for her, and then forced her into his truck. He was the last person to be seen with Nisha Brooks while she was alive. Tamika hadn't just told a small lie. She had lied about the most critical moment of the entire timeline. She hadn't been waiting at home for a visit that never came. She had been with Nisha just moments before she was abducted by her own husband. The entire dynamic of the case had just been fractured and reformed into something new and terrifying. This wasn't just a story about a jealous husband and a secret lover. Tamika was no longer a peripheral character, a grieving relative. She was standing at the very epicenter of the crime, a gatekeeper to the truth of what happened in that house. And Thorne knew, with chilling certainty, that whatever secret she and Nisha shared was the secret that had gotten Nisha killed. He printed a series of still frames from the video. Nisha entering the street, Darius's truck circling. The final, tense confrontation. He was done asking questions. It was time for answers. The interrogation room was small, gray, and designed to make people feel insignificant. When Tamika Brooks was let in, she looked as though she had already shrunk to fit the room's oppressive dimensions. She sat down, her hands folded primly in her lap, the picture of a cooperative witness. But her eyes, darting nervously around the room, told a different story. Thorne entered and sat opposite her, his movements calm and deliberate. He didn't speak. He simply took the glossy 8x10 photos he'd printed from the traffic cam footage and laid them on the metal table between them, one by one. The first photo, Nisha's red car parked on Maple Street. The second, Nisha walking toward Tamika's house. The third, Darius's truck, circling. The final damning photo, Darius confronting Nisha on the street before she got into his truck. Tamika stared at the images, her face draining of all color. The carefully constructed facade of the grieving, uninvolved sister-in-law shattered into a million pieces. Her shoulders slumped and a low, wounded sound escaped her lips. She didn't try to deny it. The unblinking eye of the camera had rendered denial impossible. "You lied to me, Tamika," Thorne said, his voice quiet but firm, cutting through the silence. "You lied to me from the very beginning. Nisha was at your house that day. What happened in that house?" "I was scared," she whispered, her gaze fixed on the photos as if they were sentencing documents. "I was so scared you'd think that I had something to do with it." "Did you?" "No." The word was a cry of anguish, ripped from her soul. "Never. I would never hurt Nisha. I loved her." The words hung in the sterile air of the room. Thorne watched her, letting the weight of her confession settle. This was the moment. The truth was just beneath the surface, fighting to get out. He saw her composure break, her face crumpling as she covered it with her hands, her body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from a place of profound, unbearable loss. When she finally quieted, Thorne asked the question that had been forming in the back of his mind, the secret that explained everything. This lover we've been looking for, the true light Nisha told her friend about. It was you, wasn't it? Through her tears, Tamika slowly, almost imperceptibly nodded. The confession, when it came, was a torrent of pain and secrets held back for too long. "It started about 6 months ago," she began, her voice hoarse. "Darius was on a long-haul trucking job for a week. Nisha and we were just hanging out. We always got along so well. She was so vibrant, so full of energy. She saw me in a way no one ever had before. Her eyes had a distant, haunted look, as she remembered. I'd never felt that way about a woman, but with her it was different. It was easy. It was right." The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The secret wasn't a man. It was a forbidden love, hidden in the most dangerous place possible, inside the family. "Did Darius know?" Thorne asked. "No. God, no," she said, shaking her head vehemently. "We were so careful. He was so possessive of her. We knew he'd lose his mind. That's why she married him." Thorne stared at her, stunned. "What are you talking about?" Tamika looked up at him, her eyes pleading for him to understand the desperate logic of their plan. "It was my idea," she confessed, her voice dropping to a whisper of shame. "A terrible, stupid idea. Nisha was going to leave him, but we were terrified of how he'd react. I thought, if they were married, I could be at their house all the time. I could see her. As his sister, no one would ever suspect. It was a cover, a way for us to be together, right under his nose. until we could save enough money to leave this town and go somewhere we could be ourselves. The sheer tragic naivety of the plan was breathtaking. They hadn't just hidden their love, they had built a cage around it, using the institution of marriage as the bars, believing it would keep them safe. Instead, it had trapped them with the one person they feared most. "What happened that day?" Thorne asked gently. "When she came to your house?" "She was terrified," Tamika said. She'd found a tiny camera hidden in their bedroom clock. She knew Darius was onto her. She said he'd been acting strange, cold. She wanted to leave right then. Our plan was for her to pack a bag and stay with me. We were going to run. She started to cry again. But we were too late. As she was leaving, he was there, waiting for her. I watched from my window as he forced her into his truck. I called her phone 100 times. It just went to voicemail. And then, the next day, he reported her missing, acting like he was worried sick. The interrogation room was silent except for the sound of Tamika's quiet sobs. The truth was finally out, and it was more tragic and complex than Thorne could have ever imagined. It wasn't a simple case of jealousy. It was a story of forbidden love, desperate plans, and a terrible, fatal miscalculation. Tamika Brooks hadn't killed her lover, but the secret she had tried so desperately to protect had armed the man who did. When the guards escorted Darius Brooks into the same interrogation room his sister had just left, he looked different. The mask of the grieving husband had fallen away, replaced by a sullen, simmering anger. His eyes, no longer red-rimmed with feigned tears, were cold and hard. He sat down and stared at a spot on the wall, refusing to look at Thorne. Thorne let the silence hang in the air, a heavy, suffocating blanket. He methodically arranged his evidence on the table. The photos of the bloody wrench and the hidden compartment, the ME's report detailing death by strangulation, the still frames from the traffic camera showing the abduction. Finally, he placed his digital recorder on the table. "It's over, Darius," Thorne began, his voice devoid of sympathy. "We know everything." Darius remained silent, his jaw clenched. "We know about the garage," Thorne continued, tapping a photo of the glowing luminol stains. "We know you killed her there. We know you used this wrench." He pushed the photo of the weapon forward. "We have a witness who heard you arguing, who saw you leave in your truck and come back late at night. We have you on camera forcing your wife into your truck outside your sister's house." Still, Darius said nothing. He was a stone wall. "And we have Tamika," Thorne said, delivering the final blow. "She's in the next room. She told us everything, about her and Nisha, about their relationship, about their plan to leave you." At the mention of his sister's name, Darius finally broke. A low, guttural growl rumbled in his chest. He slowly turned his head and fixed Thorne with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. "That lying bitch," he spat. "She's not the one who's been lying, Darius," Thorne countered. He hit the record button. "Tell me what happened." Darius let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "You want to know what happened? I'll tell you what happened." He leaned forward, his eyes burning with a righteous fury. "I loved her. I gave that girl everything, a home, a life, and she spit in my face." He recounted the story from his perspective, his voice dripping with the venom of a man who sees himself as the ultimate victim. "I knew something was wrong. She was distant, always on her phone, smiling at something, then hiding the screen when I walked in. I thought it was some guy from the diner, some young punk. So yeah, I put a camera in the bedroom. I had a right to know who was trying to destroy my home." He paused, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. "But I didn't find anything on the camera, not at first. The truth, it came to me, a gift." He described receiving an anonymous text message. No words, just a single attached photo. A picture of Nisha, his wife, kissing someone, a woman. "At first I didn't recognize her," Darius snarled, "but I looked closer. The haircut, the cheap silver bracelet she always wore. It was Tamika, my own sister, my own flesh and blood, stabbing me in the back with my wife." The raw betrayal in his voice was chilling. He described driving to Tamika's house in a blind rage, seeing Nisha walk out, and how everything clicked into place. "I confronted her right there on the street. She didn't even deny it. She stood there and told me she loved my sister, told me she only married me to be closer to her, to use me, to use my house, my money. They were laughing at me, the two people I trusted most in the world. His voice dropped, becoming colder, more methodical. I told her to get in the truck, that we were going home to talk. The whole way she's crying, saying she never meant to hurt me. Hurt me? She and my sister plotted to destroy my life, and she's worried about hurting my feelings. They arrived at the house and went straight to the garage. I wanted to show her I knew. I had papers, phone records I'd pulled. I threw them in her face, and she just snapped. Started screaming that I was a controlling old man, that she was leaving me for Tamika that very night, that they were going to run away and be together, and I'd be all alone again. Darius's hands clenched into fists on the table, his knuckles white. She turned to walk away. She was leaving me, after everything. I don't remember picking up the wrench. I just remember the rage. It was white, blinding. The next thing I knew, she was on the floor, and there was so much blood. He looked at Thorne, his eyes empty of remorse. There was no apology, no regret, only the cold, hard justification of a man who believed his rage was warranted. I tried to clean up, he said, his voice flat. I wrapped her up, put her in the truck, and drove to the river. I just wanted her gone. I wanted them both gone. Darius Brooks had confessed. He had detailed every step of his crime, not with the remorse of a man who'd made a terrible mistake in a moment of passion, but with the chilling conviction of a man who felt he had delivered a righteous punishment. He wasn't a grieving husband. He was an executioner, and as the officers came to lead him away, Thorne knew that the real crime hadn't just been the murder itself, but the toxic brew of jealousy, pride, and hate that had fueled it. The trial of Darius Brooks was short. Faced with the mountain of physical evidence, the traffic camera footage, his sister's testimony, and his own cold-blooded confession, the jury took less than 3 hours to find him guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice, in its cold, procedural form, had been served. But in the quiet town of Serenity Creek, the verdict didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the final somber chapter of a tragedy that had no winners. Months later, the oppressive heat of summer had given way to the cool, crisp air of autumn. The leaves on the trees lining the town streets were turning brilliant shades of red and gold, a beautiful, dying spectacle. Detective Thorne found himself at the small regional airport, a place of transient hellos and permanent goodbyes. He had heard through the grapevine that Tamika Brooks was leaving. He saw her standing near the large windows overlooking the tarmac, a single suitcase at her feet. She was a silhouette against the bright morning sun, a ghost of the woman he had interviewed months ago. Her face was thin and gaunt, the vibrant spark he had once mistaken for grief now extinguished, replaced by an endless hollow exhaustion. "Headed somewhere warmer?" Thorne asked, walking up beside her. She turned, her eyes showing no surprise, no emotion at all. "I don't know where I'm going," she said, her voice a flat monotone. "Just away, somewhere nobody knows my name. Somewhere the ghosts aren't so loud." She had sold the house, sold her car, and packed her entire life into one suitcase. She was trying to outrun her own shadow. "I visited him," she continued, her gaze returning to the planes outside. "In prison, he won't speak to me. He just sits there, on the other side of the glass, and stares. Sometimes I think he's imagining all the ways he could kill me, too. And sometimes I think a part of him still loves me. And that's even worse." Her voice was devoid of self-pity, just a statement of fact. "We're all each other has left, and we have nothing." "Time heals," Thorne said, the words feeling like a cheap, inadequate platitude as soon as they left his mouth. Tamika gave a bitter, humorless smile. "No, detective, it doesn't. Time doesn't heal a thing. It just gets heavier. It teaches you how to carry the pain without collapsing." Her flight was called over the intercom. She picked up her suitcase. "Thank you for finding the truth." "It's my job," he said. "I know," she replied, and with a final empty look, she turned and walked toward the gate, a small, lonely figure disappearing into a crowd of strangers, forever defined by a love that had led to ruin. Thorne watched her go, a profound sense of melancholy settling over him. He had solved the case. The killer was behind bars. But the echoes of the crime would reverberate forever. 3 lives had been shattered. Darius, consumed by his rage, would die in a cage. Nisha, who had yearned for a life of freedom, lay in a cold grave, and Tamika was now condemned to a prison of her own, a life of exile haunted by what-ifs and if-onlys. Driving back to the station, Thorne thought about the core of the tragedy. It wasn't just about jealousy or a forbidden affair. It was born from a quieter, more insidious poison, the fear of living an honest life. Nisha and Tamika's love had been real, but they had built its foundation on a catastrophic lie, believing deception was safer than truth. They were afraid of the judgment of a small town, of the anger of a controlling man, and that fear had led them to make a fatal choice. They chose the secret over the truth, the shadow over the light. The lesson was brutal and clear. Lies, even those woven with the best of intentions to protect a fragile love, do not build a sanctuary. They build a prison. And eventually, the walls always close in, crushing everyone inside. The placid, muddy waters of the Akmol-Jay River continued their slow journey to the sea, indifferent to the human dramas played out on its banks, its dark currents a silent keeper of this story, and countless others waiting to be told.